But first, this is the Fit Mess, where together we learn to develop habits that help us live beyond our mental health struggles to create happier, healthier lives.
He's Zach. He lives in the future with his anxiety.
He's Jeremy, and he lives in the past with his depression. And we get together once a week in the present to share the obstacles we face and how we overcome them.
The idea behind Focus Bear is it's a distraction management and habit forming app targeted at people with ADHD and autism. That's a group that I belong to myself. I've been diagnosed in the last couple of years with both of those conditions, which has been both a recognition of some of the challenges that I face, but also it's helped me to see some of the positive aspects of being neurodivergent. And one of them is that I thrive if I have a very strong morning routine. And that's really the focus of the app, to allow me to do a sequence of habits in the morning that then help me to have a very productive and a happy day.
So let's talk about how this app helps, because staying focused for most people with as many distractions as we have on a day-to-day basis is a big enough challenge. But when you do have something like ADHD or neurodivergent for whatever reason, that has got to be I can't even imagine how challenging that's got to be. So how does the app address those issues? And can it be applied to people who are not neurodivergent?
It can be used by anyone. I see people, especially with ADHD, as being canaries in the coal mine of our societal experiment with attention-grabbing apps and websites, that we've really had a drive in the last 10 years or so towards venture capitalists building these companies which are trying to monopolize our attention. And we're starting to see a bit of a movement away from that now, because everyone, especially people with ADHD, are realizing that it just fragments our attention and makes it very hard for us to get anything done and to have meaningful relationships. The way that Focus Bear helps is that you configure what websites are allowed and what websites are blocked. And if I say go to Facebook during the day, it's going to show a pop-up saying, are you sure you need to do this right now? How about you save it until after work? And there's a button I can press, and then it will add it to my anti-to-do list. And then at 5 p.m., I am allowed to go through my anti-to-do list and do all the things that I would have liked to do during the day, but I probably shouldn't have. So all the news websites that I was tempted to go and check out, or Facebook, Reddit, those websites like that are probably not too helpful for me to be doing when I'm meant to, say, write reports during my day.
Can you put things in that you want to do as well? So like, as opposed to an anti-to-do list where it pops up and says, hey, this is something that you do need to get done.
Yeah, we don't actually have a to-do list feature yet, because most people tend to have their own system. I personally go with a paper system, where the night before, one of my evening routine habits is to spend some time looking through my calendar and my Trello board and writing it down on paper, because I find that doing it by hand allows me to connect a lot more deeply with both my schedule for the next day and my to-do list. But we probably will add in a to-do list feature in the future for people who don't have some kind of other system.
I think it's incredibly fascinating with all of the to-do apps that exist. I mean, there's a million different ways to approach it. The fact that you've created an anti-to-do list, like that's unheard of. I've never heard of anybody taking that approach.
Well, it's inspired by Warren Buffett. He had this idea of you set your New Year's resolutions, and then often people will come up with 15 things, and he says, take the first 5 things and make them your focus for the year. And the other 10 things, put them on your anti-resolutions, things that you won't do because we just don't have time to do absolutely everything. Otherwise, we'll be running in a million directions and not making progress.
So I work in IT, and at any given point, I've got like 30 computers in my house. I know most people don't, but does this app work out? Like, is it just websites? Is it apps? Does it work on iPhones, Androids? Does this work everywhere, or do I have to like pick and choose which devices I use?
Yeah, it doesn't work on Linux, but Windows, Mac, iPhone, and Android, it works across all of those, and it syncs your progress across all of them. So there's the 2 aspects of the app. One is the distraction management, which means that if I start a focus session on my Mac, if I then pick up my phone and try and go to TikTok, it's going to block it because it recognizes that I'm trying to focus. And the same thing across Windows and all the other devices. And then the other part of the app is the routine feature, where in the morning, I've got my 3-hour-long morning routine. Most people don't have one that is that long. But if I, for example, get halfway through my routine, and then there's some apps like Duolingo that I prefer to do on my phone, I can pick it up and the progress is transferred across. So if I'm halfway through my routine on my computer, it will be transferred halfway across on my phone as well.
So distractions are one thing, but our reliance and our addiction to tech in general, I think, is a problem for a lot of people. So does this also help not only to avoid distraction, but does it help reduce the amount of time that I'm staring at a screen all day?
Yeah. And I think screen time isn't created equal. There's sort of passive screen time where if I'm watching YouTube or browsing Reddit, then that's not great for my brain and it's probably not great for my relationships. But if I'm using it in an active way, if I'm using technology to allow me to be creative or to be learning things that I really care about, I think that's actually quality time. Though I still want to have time away from all screens in general because it's not great for the eyes to be staring at small things for a long time. So the way I approach it is I begin my day on a screen because I'm using Focus Bear to kick off my morning routine. But it's not like my first act in my morning routine after I log how much sleep I've had is to go for a run. And I don't take my phone when I go for a run. I take a piece of paper to take notes. But apart from that, I'm out of the doors. I'm out of the house for 25 minutes. And then I come back and I do some journaling. And I prefer to do that on my computer. Some people prefer to do it on a piece of paper. But I think, for example, digital journaling can be a really constructive use of screens. And then other things aren't so constructive. But if we manage them better, then it works very well.
So I'd like to shift focus a little bit here. I'd love to hear about your journey to where you are today. I know you mentioned earlier in the show that you were just recently diagnosed. So this is something that you've probably struggled with your entire life. What did that journey look like for you, struggling with these issues until you were diagnosed? Like, did you know you had a problem? Did you know or suspect that you had these issues before you were diagnosed? And then what changed after you were diagnosed?
Part of it was a surprise for me. The ADHD diagnosis came out of the blue for me because I had thought that I was actually doing okay, but it's a bit like a swan in water where it looks like it's doing okay, but under the surface, it's going mad with all these different coping mechanisms. Because most people don't have, say, 5 different calendars and all these to-do lists and setting alarms for a very busy schedule. I had 4 different jobs. I was just a little bit frantic with my overall activity. And I thought that was just me, but looking at it and realizing I had always struggled from a young age with being late. That even though I lived 5 minutes away from high school, I was late nearly every day. And I often lose things. There's a lot of executive functioning issues that have been with me for my whole life. And in some ways, getting diagnosed was a really freeing experience because instead of blaming myself and getting into self-flagellation of why have I done this again, I now understand why I have a tendency towards those issues. But it's not like it's just free reign for me to be late all the time. Instead, it's me recognizing that I have to work harder in order to be able to do things that other people can do quite easily. And now I've got very specific coping mechanisms. I work with an ADHD coach. I've got tactics that I can use that help me to be better at those things. And then the autism diagnosis wasn't a surprise. I had suspected that for a long time, that I had always had issues with particularly group social interaction. I found that very challenging, and it's been helpful in terms of, again, not beating myself up about that and not seeing that if I go to a party with loud noise and lots of unstructured conversations, I find that very hard. And I thought I just sucked at life basically when I was a teenager and my early 20s. And now I've come to recognize that I don't actually have to do those things. I don't have to go to nightclubs. I don't have to be in high stimulation environments, which I find unenjoyable and very challenging. That I can have a rich, fulfilling life doing things that feel a bit more natural to me in a low stimulation environment. So I'm very grateful for having, I guess, learned a bit more about myself, and it has taken some of the baggage away from me and allowed me to focus on things that I can do well.
I think those are important lessons for everybody. I mean, I feel like I've only recently discovered that, I don't have to do the things that I don't want to do. I don't have to do the things that make me uncomfortable and that I feel like I'm struggling with. And I certainly don't have to kick my own ass every time I feel bad about them or whatever. Like that's a lesson that applies to everybody. I don't care what your circumstance is. The less that you're doing things you don't want to do, and the less you beat yourself up, it's a much more freeing way to live. I wanted to, well, you've hinted at and mentioned a little bit of your rigorous 3-hour morning routine. I'm curious what takes 3 hours. Walk me through what you do and why this is important to start your day with every day.
So the 3 hours is broken up into a few aspects. One is exercise. I go for a half an hour run. I do 10 minutes of yoga and I do a 45-minute resistance training workout. And that's spread out throughout the 3 hours. I begin with a run. I find that's a really good way for me to begin the day. That I do mindfulness later, seated mindfulness. But if I try and start with meditation, I'll either just fall asleep or just find it very unpleasant. But I find that going for a run, it has some of the benefits in terms of I concentrate on my breathing while I'm running. I'm outdoors in nature, running next to a beautiful coastline. So it's really relaxing for me. And doing the exercise helps to boost my energy levels because I'm sometimes a little bit tired when I wake up.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time I've finished my run, I'm in a good mood, I'm feeling energized, and I'm ready then to continue with more of the contemplative parts of my morning routine. So I do some journaling, I do some breathing exercises, and that really helps me to feel calm and ready to approach some of the harder things on my to-do list. I also do that as part of my morning routine, look at my day ahead. What appointments do I have? What do I plan to do as my big rocks on my to-do list? And then I do a little bit of creative expression as one of the other aspects of it. I either write a blog post or I record a YouTube video and I spend 10 minutes working on my book. And even though that doesn't sound like a lot of time, 10 minutes of working on a book, I've actually made a decent amount of progress doing that every day for the last couple of months. I've written 20,000 words over 3 months or so, just punching out maybe 150 words every morning. And it adds up and it feels very easy doing it that way. All in all, it adds up to 3 hours. And I feel really happy at the end that I'm clear on what I want to achieve in the day. And I've already made a head start on some of the creative aspects of my day that I otherwise would tend to put off. I didn't begin with a 3-hour morning routine. I started this process in January 2022 when I was really stressed out. At that stage, I was in the process of selling my last business and I was dealing with customers. I had another job and talking to accountants and lawyers and negotiating, and it was super stressful. And I just wasn't prioritizing some of these self-care actions that I knew were actually very important for me. And what I began with at that point, it was the inspiration for the app of realizing that I had developed a negative coping strategy of waking up and checking emails first thing, which is not a good way to start the day. I'd get very anxious and it would also put me into a state of hyper-focus where I'd just be looking at my emails and then often there'd be hours of emails to answer because I'm in Australia, my customers were all in the US. So I just lose the time that I had allocated for my morning routine. And I'd feel stressed and tired by the end of that. And what I wanted was a little chink in that time where I could begin with even just a small morning routine. So I began with a 10-minute morning routine at that stage where I just went for a 5-minute run and did 5 minutes of meditation. And even though 5 minutes is almost pointless because I come from an ultra running background where I used to do 50-kilometer races and I'd comfortably run for hours on end. But 5 minutes was actually okay. It felt short enough that it didn't feel like a burden. I still got some of the benefits of increasing my heart rate and improving my mood. And then from there, I built it up from 5 minutes to 6 minutes and gradually increasing it until it's where it is now.
We spend a lot of time talking to people about starting with small steps and building small things onto it. So it's just incredible that it went from 10 minutes to 3 hours, but you did it the right way. Like you started with those small manageable chunks. I really do like that. I have always had a little bit of a struggle, even when I do like go, you know what, phone's away, technology's away, I got to do X. And then I find myself doing some menial task around the house that I never wanted to do, but because I have to do the other thing, I go and do that thing. So can you take the strategies of the app and kind of build them into your life as well? Because I know I will monkey brain all over the place all day and not get the lawn mowed or the thing that I need to get done. So like, how does this kind of extend a little bit into all those other non-technology bits?
Really like the concept of the nudge effect. There's a book with that name, and the basic idea is that a little bit of a nudge in the right direction can be all that it takes. So for example, for me, I haven't been very good at doing the dishes in the past, and that's been something that my wife hasn't been too happy about, that I haven't contributed to chores. And I found that by putting it into Focus Bear as an activity where it's got a countdown timer, I think that's really key for me. And it tells me, go and do the dishes. And I've got 5 minutes to go do that. And that's actually enough for me to do it. That I need the reminder of, at this point, I'm going to be doing that activity, and it's only for 5 minutes. And I find for me, that's all it takes, that I just need that little bit of a nudge, and then I'll do it. And you can achieve a similar effect in other ways, for example, by putting it into the calendar and having it doesn't have to be a huge amount of time. The challenge for me is always with task initiation, that once I start, I don't have a lawn, so I don't have a direct connection with that. But I can imagine the hardest thing when I've done it in the past is actually getting the lawnmower out of the garage, and maybe it needs charging or maybe it needs fuel put in. And that can be the part that's challenging. And then after that, I haven't really minded actually doing the mowing part. That's relatively enjoyable. Is that part of it for you?
Absolutely. For me, it's the getting started. It's almost, I don't have a huge issue with it anymore, but like going to the gym, it's 95% of the battle was just getting to the gym, and then the rest is cake.
Yep. And I try and get very clear on what those preparatory activities are. So for example, for my workout, I have one of the actions before I actually begin the workout is start the timer on my watch. And that is almost a signal for myself that we're doing it. This is the point, that I start the timer on my watch, and then I go to beachbody.com on my computer and I hit play on a workout, and that's it. If I've done those two things, then I'm pretty likely to do the whole workout.
I love the workouts where you don't have to think about it. It just tells you what to do. And as long as you play along, you've accomplished the goal. Something in our initial exchanges back and forth prior to having you on the show, you mentioned the idea of sort of overdoing it, right? There's a tendency for people to kind of go too far with things, whether it is working out or whatever passion they sort of take on. And of course, if it is something you love, there's a place for that. It's okay to run 50 kilometers if you're an avid runner and that's the thing you're into. But have you experienced yourself, or do you know of situations where people take it too far? And I guess, what's your message about that?
Yeah, for me, the ultra running was probably taking it too far. I found that it wasn't too healthy for my body, that I was developing knee injuries, but still persisting with my training. At that point, when I was going through that overtraining period, it was in my early 20s, and I was struggling with body image issues, and I was actually veering into exercise bulimia, which is where you overeat and then exercise to compensate for it. And I was also, towards the end of my issues there, I was getting into throw up bulimia, where I was seeking to control my weight through a combination of exercise, starving and purging. And that was very unhealthy for me. And that was a sign of where I was coming to rely on exercise as my sole coping strategy for stress. That if I felt anxious, that I would binge eat and I would exercise. And not a good recipe. That my weight remained the same, but my head was not in a good state. And I got progressively more and more anxious until the point where I hit essentially a rock bottom and sought recovery for my eating disorder. And that's no longer an issue for me. I now have a diversity of coping strategies that I use. And I think that's really key, that I don't want to be overdoing it in any one area. That I guess more recently work has been an area where I've overdone it, especially in that period where I was going through the sale of my business. I was working probably 60 hours per week, and I was not sleeping enough, and it was really not good. So work-life balance is an elusive concept, but I think it's important for me to definitely prioritize, for example, my relationship with my wife, my health, and actually having fun as well. If I can do things in all of those areas, then it's going to be better. And even say the 3-hour morning routine is probably excessive. It's okay for me now, but my wife and I are trying to have kids, and I don't think I'll be able to keep that up if I haven't a young child in my life.
Yeah, I know where I'm putting my money on that bet.
Yeah.
You mentioned some coping mechanisms for the excessive exercise or compulsive workouts and things like that. I'd love to hear a couple of those if you wouldn't mind sharing that would be, like practical for everyone, right? That, some of us, and I mean, we all suffer from things like that in some way, shape, or form. So I'd love to hear a couple of those coping mechanisms that you were talking about.
Sure. The three main ones for me are social buffering, journaling, and mindfulness. Social buffering, another name for just talking to a close friend about the things that are going on, that if I'm feeling anxious, being able to share with someone else, hey, I'm really scared about this upcoming assignment that I've got. I don't think I can do it. And just by talking to someone else, that really helps me to feel better. And it's not something that I had done in the past. Potentially the autistic part of me, I felt quite reluctant to talk to other people, but I found that it does actually help me unburdening myself in that way, and also being able to hear other people also share some of the things that are going on for them, and then being grateful that I'm glad that I don't have what's going on for them, having some empathy for them, but also having some gratitude for the good things that I have in my life. Journaling, I do that morning and night. In the evening, I'll do a bit of a check of my day. What went well? What could I have improved? And what am I worried about, or what am I angry about? And by doing that writing before I go to bed, it allows me to sleep much better. And then the same thing in the morning, by writing down my thoughts in the morning, it helps me to deal with the monkey mind that I associate with ADHD, where I have tons of ideas, and it can be hard for me to actually begin with the key things. So by dumping it out on paper, it makes it a lot easier for me to be focused throughout the day. And then the third one is mindfulness, which I would group into both active mindfulness in terms of running, yoga, anything where I'm moving my body, but not doing other things. And that really helps me to get centered. And then on that, doing more of the seated mindfulness of sitting down, counting my breaths. Those three strategies, in addition to exercise. I think exercise is still a wonderful coping strategy for me. I think there's plenty of research around the endorphin boost that you get from it. But there's, I think, a sweet spot that, say, half an hour of exercise or half an hour of aerobic exercise and then some resistance training is really healthy. But the 30 hours of exercise that I was doing per week in the past was excessive.
It might have been a bit much.
Yeah.
Well, very cool. Lots of great advice here. Lots of great stories and lessons that you've learned throughout your life. And it sounds like a fascinating app, and I can't wait to check it out for myself. Where can we learn more about you and the app?
The app is available at focusbear.io, and you can find out about me. I've got a About Me section on the page, and if you fill out the contact form there, I will read all of those emails and get back to you.
We know this podcast is amazing and doesn't seem to lack anything, but we need a legal disclaimer. Prior to implementing anything discussed in this podcast, it is your responsibility to conduct your own research and consult your physician. You should assume that Jeremy and Zach don't know what they're talking about, and they're not liable for any physical or emotional issues that occur directly or indirectly from listening to this podcast.